This week, Conflict Zone is in the British city of Cambridge, and my guest is one of India's best-known politicians, the MP Shashi Tharoor. In 2014, his Congress party was handed its worst ever national election defeat, since when it's gone on losing. Does this, the party of the Gandhi dynasty, deserve to survive? Shashi Tharoor, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Good to be with you again, Tim.
2014, your Congress party had its worst ever national election defeat. The string of losses has gone on since then. Is it time to kiss the party goodbye?
No, because though it was indeed the worst ever electoral defeat, there were a couple of consolations, oddly enough, amid the carnage. The first was that we still were the only party that actually won something everywhere. In other words, where we'd won 10 or 12 seats, we'd only won 1 or 2 this time around. We won them in the northwest, in the southwest, in the northeast, in the heartland.
But you lost power in Assam, you lost it in Kerala, you didn't get a single seat in Delhi.
You're now referring to the election since 14. I was
Yes.
talking about 14
Since
14, what we've done well has been Bihar, where we are in power after a very long time, but as part of a larger coalition. And what we've done not so well, I would suspect, is the states you mentioned, where we had been in power for some time, and anti-incumbency is a very powerful factor.
But you have a losing ticket, a proven losing ticket with Sonia Gandhi and Rahul Gandhi. You have a man in Rahul Gandhi who clearly doesn't even want to be in Parliament, does he?
I don't think that's a fair criticism. I've actually...
That's one of the worst attendance records, doesn't he? Worst attendance records.
Parliament is a forum that he has increasingly used more effectively than in the past, and so his recent attendance record is actually pretty good. But more important,
it's 54%. The national average is 81. Since 2014, his attendance rate was 54%. Number of questions asked, 0. Private members' bills, 0. A below average MP by every measurement.
Except that he's also a party leader. He has organizational responsibilities around the country, and sometimes...
But he's not a winning ticket, Shashi Tharoor, is he? He's not a winning ticket, he's a losing ticket.
Well, as I said, he has won in the past and can win again.
How many train wrecks can this party absorb?
Well, look, we are certainly going through a pretty bad phase of our existence, but we believe we have what it takes to come back. We have the right values and principles. We have a long and pedigreed history. We have a presence throughout the country. We are still a party with a national footprint, something nobody else can say.
With its leadership facing a court case, allegations of illegally acquired land. Supreme Court said the other day, this case should go ahead.
Look, cases can well go ahead, but nobody has been found guilty of anything. It's very easy, I'm afraid, in our country to file charges. But in this particular case, and I think you're referring to what's known as the National Herald case, where a party newspaper, the National Herald, was transferred from a larger collective set of individual owners to a smaller group controlled by the party.
Yes, it's a row about land acquisition.
It's a row about the possession of a newspaper, which of course
But they wanted
has
the case quashed, and
and
the Supreme Court refused to do that.
They wanted to quash it without a trial.
It's not a great recommendation, is it, to have that against the leadership? Aren't you sick of dynastic parties and dynastic rule in India? People passing it from one member of the family to the other. It's like handing round the soup plates at dinner, isn't it?
But
hasn't this gone on long enough in India?
The problem, Tim, is that it's going on in pretty much every party, so that it's very difficult to single one out and say, you shouldn't be doing this. What I've discovered about Indian politics, having entered it, is that a great deal of what you and I might consider to be not the best democratic practice is so deeply entrenched in our culture that it's infected our politics as well.
Yeah, but your party was in power longer than anybody else since independence and did nothing about this. You've got figures compiled in 2012. 100% of Indian MPs under the age of 30 were hereditary. 100%. A family business.
Well, there aren't very many MPs under the age of 30 to begin with.
All right, 2/3 of Indian MPs under the age of 40 were from political families. When you get to women, it was even worse. Just under 70% of women MPs came into politics
On
through
their own.
family connections. No, through family connections.
I mean, look, since fortunately, for this purposes of this conversation, I can assure you that I have never had anybody in my family in politics in either direction, nor do I have any children who are interested in inheriting what I have to say, and I'm there because of my personal convictions. Let me say that
don't think that's healthy, though, this situation,
the fact
do you?
that families invade this profession too does not objectively seem ideal, but it's rampant throughout all of
But
Indian
your
society.
party had
We
more
have
time than any other party to do
but
something
Tim,
about
listen,
this.
Listen, over
didn't it?
3,000 years, we have Bollywood film stars who are the sons of Bollywood film stars. We have dentists who are the sons of dentists. We have carpenters who are the sons of carpenters. Ours has become a culture. That's how the caste
And you have
system
crooks
began.
sitting in Parliament. September 2013, The Hindu reported that 30% of sitting MPs and 31% of those in the legislative assemblies
criminal charges
were facing
against
criminal charges against them. And this continues to this day, and your party is as bad in this, if not worse, than the BJP.
Actually, the current percentages put us well below the BJP on this particular area.
I don't think so,
because the
Shashi
criminals-
Tharoor. I don't think so. In the
most
Punjab
recent
elections
figures I've
this
seen.
year, 8% of your party's candidates faced serious criminal charges. The BJP clocked up 4%. In the Goa
BJP
elections,
has fewer candidates because they're not a contender.
we're looking
in
at the
Punjab.
percentage. We're looking at the percentage of candidates. In Goa, 16% of your candidates facing serious charges. 8% of the BJP's. Uttarakhand, 17% of your candidates accused of serious crime. And we're not talking about parking offences here. We're talking about murder charges, extortion, attempted rape, crimes against women, and they're sitting in Parliament
Well, the thing
facing these serious
The thing
charges.
is, Tim, until they're found guilty, it is wrong to conclude that these charges are legitimate. And that's precisely why, in a few cases, thank God the figures are lower than the 30% we first talked about from the earlier election. In a few cases, candidates whom the party judges deserve the benefit of the doubt because of their public support.
Not according to the Electoral Commission, they don't. In 1998, 2004, the Commission recommended that candidates charged with serious offences be disqualified even before conviction. And in 2013, the Verma Commission recommended the same. Your
But the courts
party,
went the
along
other
with all
way.
the others, refused to heed the advice.
No, the courts went the other way and said that anybody who is convicted will be instantly disqualified from Parliament, and indeed people have been. In the old days, what would happen is you'd be convicted and then you'd file an appeal, and on the basis of the appeal, you'd continue in politics for years.
What other democracy would tolerate having 30% of its parliamentarians facing criminal charges? You want the badge of the world's largest democracy. This isn't the way to earn it, is it?
Tim, this is why I feel that people with my sort of background should also come into politics, and we should have educated professionals also entering the fray.
But you were a government minister in your party. You didn't do anything about
I
this.
couldn't do anything about that.
Well, you didn't even raise your voice against it, did you?
No, I've written books raising my voice against this. Read India from Midnight to the Millennium. I've decried this 20 years ago.
But the fact is, with all the years that your
that
party was in power, you cemented this unbreakable nexus of politicians and corrupt business. You cemented it.
You're now going on to a different tack, because criminal charges are one thing, corrupt practices with business are another. I've decried that too, but that's a different phenomenon. And that,
But it
I would
stuck.
say,
It was cemented during years of Congress party rule, wasn't it?
Unfortunately, every party is complicit. I wish one could say that one party was more guilty
That's
than
not a
others.
great excuse,
It's
is
not
it?
a great excuse,
One person murders somebody, so it's okay for other people to do it.
No, you know that's not what I mean.
No, but I mean, you are saying that. You're excusing.
No, what I'm saying is to single out the Congress party for political corruption is laughable.
But you were in power most of the time.
And those who are in power, sadly, in various states, who've been pretty much every party in India has held power somewhere or the other, have unfortunately all faced these charges. It's partly because our system has adopted a certain hypocrisy of unrealistically low legal expense limits, which makes every party seek
Which
and
nobody
spend
abides by
unaccounted funds.
anyway.
Exactly. So they seek and spend unaccounted funds, and the generation of those unaccounted funds is often the root of corruption.
But
I have
your
decried
party-
this, and I've decried it in Parliament, by the way, in speeches in Parliament. I have said that we cannot remain silent about political corruption and talk about black money as if it's only coming out of real estate transactions and things like that.
Your
It's coming out of
party,
politics
Shashi
too.
Tharoor, has performed significantly worse on financial transparency than the BJP. During the financial years between 2000 2004-5 and 2014-15, 83% of your party's total income came from unknown sources, compared to 65% of the BJP's. So you don't obey the rules that there are there. The rules are full of loopholes, aren't they?
And that's why they need to be changed. And in fact, one of the proposals which has come up now is that the anonymous donations have to be capped at a much lower figure. I think it's 2,000 rupees rather than 20,000 rupees.
Who's going to obey that? Former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee was often quoted as saying, every legislator starts his career with the lie of the false election return he files. Did you ever file a false election return?
Well, not knowingly, but I suspect...
How do you mean not knowingly? You didn't have responsibility for the ones you
No,
sold?
because you see what happens is you spend the money that you are legally able to raise and spend. And that's what I sign my election expense sheets for. But I have to admit that I believe there are people spending money on my behalf, including my party and its agents.
Still your responsibility, isn't it?
The fact is, everybody else is doing it. If I didn't do it, I wouldn't. Okay,
so
get out.
It's all right for me to break the rules because everybody else is breaking the rules.
I think it's important to amend the rules and be realistic about them. I think we really have to raise the legal expense limits so that people would actually be able to legally raise and spend accountable funds that are actually reasonable to reach.
But your party, along with all the others, doesn't show ever a great respect for rules. In 2012, you had a discussion at the think tank, not you personally, but MPs from both Congress and BJP, discussed spending some $3.3 million to win seats where the official limit was $26,000.
There you are.
And they did it openly. So there was no attempt to even pretend to abide by the rules.
But the irony is, how do you reach 2 million people, which is what the average MP represents, with $26,000. The initial sim is the hypocrisy of the low expense limit, which has been pegged at that level in order to demonstrate that ours is a polity where the poor too can participate.
But you may say the rules are unrealistic, but you're sending a signal that, okay, we don't care any more about the rules or the laws than you people out there anyway. What an example to set for the rest of India.
Unfortunately,
world's largest democracy.
As I said, unfortunately, the problem remains that if you choose not to reach your 2 million voters, you will not be successful in politics. So you have to reach them by whatever means you can, with whatever help you can get. And unfortunately, very often this has implied people doing corrupt things, raising unaccounted money, or what's called black money, money on which taxes haven't been paid and which are not declared in your election expense returns. And that's what Mr. Vajpayee was referring to. But don't forget, Mr. Vajpayee is the Prime Minister from the BJP party.
Absolutely.
As he's implying all parties are equally guilty.
Absolutely. But let's go back to something you said, February 2014. You wrote that the UPA, the Congress-led government, had demonstrated a commitment to accountability and transparency and had taken unprecedented measures to bring transparency into India's what you call often opaque systems. By the end of its term, your government was drowning in one high-profile corruption scandal after another, wasn't it? And you pride yourself on transparency. Let's not rewrite history, Shashi Tharoor. India under your government became a byword for corruption internationally, didn't it?
Well, let me say that the reference in my statement that you quoted was above all to the Right to Information Act, under which any Indian citizen can put a letter on a postcard or a sheet of paper and have information made available about every penny of taxpayers' money being spent or misspent by the government, about ensuring that the conduct of elected officials is indeed made transparent.
But it didn't affect the scandals. It didn't affect these huge financial scandals that your government perpetrated. The Commonwealth Games, for instance, in 2010, which ended up costing 18 times its original budget.
Well, look,
Central Vigilance Commission said around $1.8 billion had gone astray. The telecom scam, cash for votes.
But the question is, Tim, there's been an opposition party in power for the last 3 years. Why has no one been convicted if these scams really were what they were portrayed as being? A lot of this was also media exaggeration. Since then, this government has actually issued telecom spectrum, and they found that
$39 billion. It was probably one of the largest, if not one of the largest, scams in India's history.
In that case, why didn't this government make $39 billion when it conducted its telecom?
Yeah, but your telecom minister, Mr. Raja, was arrested in 2011, was out on bail in 2013.
Well, he's still facing charges, and if he's guilty,
So
he should be
was this
convicted.
press exaggeration when WikiLeaks released a leaked cable from the American embassy describing how a senior Congress party aide showed an embassy official, US embassy official, chests of cash allegedly to be used to support a key vote of confidence in 2008 when your Congress party was in power. Was that press exaggeration? This was
Well,
a
look, I
leaked
wasn't
cable.
in Indian politics in 2008. I was at the UN.
But your party was.
But
All
I can say is
I
wouldn't be
responsibility
surprised
here.
if these things did happen at that time, because it's something which has been widely talked about. But indeed, the people in power at that time are no longer heading the Congress party.
Did you think that when you went to the polls in 2014 that India wouldn't notice these huge scandals and punish you accordingly? Did you really think you'd get away with it all?
Well, I think a number of factors came into the rejection by the voters. There was everything from anti-incumbency to hyperinflation, because, well, not hyperinflation, but severe inflation because of global fuel prices, as well as indeed
They were punishing you,
corruption scandals.
Shashi Tharoor. They were punishing you for massive corruption.
Many of my colleagues suffered. I did win re-election, so all I can say is that I was able to demonstrate enough of a record of accomplishment on the ground.
You held your seat.
I held my seat.
And Congress was decimated.
Well, Congress actually, I think, has a lot of lessons to learn.
In Parliament. Less than a tenth. Less than a tenth. You were a very senior UN official, Under Secretary General Communications, Public Information. In the UN, an organisation that holds human rights dear. But when you got back to India and you asked about Kashmir, you asked this about an interview a year ago, and you talked about human rights abuses, and you said rather casually, as far as the wrongs in Kashmir are concerned, Indians have been the first to acknowledge them, to take action. It's not true, is it?
It is. I wouldn't have said it if it wasn't.
Because the people who contradicted you were your own government's group of so-called interlocutors who reported in 2012 what they called the failure to bring to book those guilty of human rights violations. This is the committee of three, the three wise men.
All friends of mine, I know them well.
Yeah, who reported that you weren't doing your job, that you weren't bringing these people to book. So for you to say that, as far as the wrongs in Kashmir are concerned, the Indians have acted, they didn't, did they?
There isn't a single crime or misbehavior even in Kashmir that hasn't first been exposed by an Indian individual, by an Indian person in authority, by an Indian media person, or by an Indian NGO. In other words, Indians are the first to bring these up. It's impossible
But this
to
is a
hide
complete
wrongdoing
variance with the human rights groups, with the State Department in 2010, which said several laws, including part of the Criminal Procedure Code and the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, were used to provide legal protection for members of security forces who violated human rights. Officers at all levels acted with impunity, and officials rarely held them accountable for illegal actions. This tells a very different story from yours. Every single human rights abuse has been investigated by an Indian. It's simply not true,
They've been exposed, they've been investigated. The issue here is whether they've been punished adequately. And this becomes a real challenge. I know there are soldiers who have been cashiered, there are court-martials that have taken place, there have been serious actions
and there have been mass
undertaken,
graves discovered. People who had disappeared.
Sadly, one of the
Kashmir.
realities in Kashmir is that the armed forces and the authorities are blamed for a number of the actions undertaken by terrorists. People are too scared to blame the terrorists because they fear for their own lives, so they blame the military.
In March 2012, your National Human Rights Commission told the UN Special Rapporteur for Extrajudicial Executions, I'm sure you know him, Christopher Hines, that from time to time, extrajudicial executions have become virtually a part of state policy. That is your National Human Rights Commission. Let's be clear here.
What does virtually mean? Because it's certainly not part of state policy.
Have become virtually a part of state. Let's be clear. You were a state then that was being accused by your own National Human Rights Commission of murdering its own people. That's what this says.
Well, no.
There's torture, there's repression, there's lack of freedom.
There are there are searing conversations about some of these things that take place that it is not in India's interest to display publicly outside, because it's not as if we're in some sort of living room situation. We are facing an onslaught by terrorists trained, armed, equipped and sent across the border by a malign military establishment in Pakistan. This is not...
You may be, and whatever you're meeting with no respect whatsoever for human rights and for constant violations and torture which have been laid at the door of the Indian.
Do you think terrorists are respecters of human rights?
You claim to be a democracy. They
exactly.
Don't. You claim to be a democracy. So you are held to a different standard.
And we do.
Unless you're quite prepared to be in the same pot as the terrorists and your government terrorists. But if you are murdering your people, as the National Human Rights Commission has said, then maybe you are in the same. Then maybe you are in the same pot as the terrorists.
That's going far too far, as you realise.
Aren't you ashamed of India's record in Kashmir?
Oh no,
Shashi Tharoor?
No.
Even when your interlocutors...
There have been very, very major mistakes made at various stages, including political mistakes. And there are some deplorable cases of poor conduct on the part of armed personnel, including particularly our armed police, who haven't often been trained adequately. But there are also very many good examples of outstandingly responsible, supportive behavior towards the local population, of which I can give you many examples.
Your interlocutors
you're singling out certain details which, in the course of an ongoing 25-year war imposed upon us with a terrorist onslaught that have been taking innocent civilian lives as well as military lives day after day, if you sometimes find that there is an overreaction or a trigger-happy young constable somewhere killing somebody, it is shocking and it's wrong.
There's a little more than that, Shashi Tharoor, as you well know, and your friends, the government-appointed group of interlocutors, was good enough to list some of the wrongs that India has visited on Kashmir in recent years. They listed them: rigged elections, the dismissal of elected governments and installation of pliant ones, the arrest of popular leaders, the choking of dissenting voices through harsh laws, the detention of political prisoners without the process of law. So I ask you again, are you proud of India's record in Kashmir?
I can tell you what I am proud of.
That's not a proud list,
I'm proud of the fact that free and fair elections have been held despite an ongoing terrorism.
You had rigged elections. You had rigged elections. The interlocutors reported
one
that.
election rigged in 1987, that's what they're referring to. I know the interlocutors.
They're not just referring to one.
There have been none since then, and no one has suggested that. There have been international observers. Even the militant parties have not accused these elections of being dishonest.
This is a huge stain on India's democracy, isn't it?
It would be if it would. I'm telling you that the elections of 87 were a huge mistake, and they were rigged undoubtedly, and undoubtedly this was certainly one of the mistakes that sparked off the disillusionment of some young people who then became militants. But there is no question.
The arrest of popular leaders, the detention of political prisoners without the process of law. These are serious charges for a country that claims to be the world's largest democracy. What has any of this got to do with democracy?
You talk
about Britain plundering. You still employ in India many of the laws and practices from the British occupation.
Are you proud of that, Tim?
No, but you called them obnoxious. Are you proud that you still have obnoxious
That's why
laws?
I'm opposing them. I'm trying to get them reformed, changed,
You haven't had much success.
I haven't had much success, but that's why you must speak up for the right, even if you don't succeed.
Why didn't India follow up on its promises to ratify the UN Convention Against Torture and the UN Convention against it's not displaced people, but it's disappeared people?
Torture was ratified. I was in Parliament. I spoke in that.
When was it ratified?
2010.
Then why have we since had? I don't think it has been ratified.
Absolutely,
it's been signed. It's been signed.
It's been signed.
The UN
well before that.
The UN Convention Against
I
Torture
was a minister
has not been
in the
signed.
government in a different portfolio,
ratified.
but I myself wrote to the Home Minister about the failure to ratify it. The bill was brought into Parliament in 2010.
And in 2013, the newspapers were writing
it passed
that it hadn't
unanimously.
been.
I was there when it passed. So whether there have been some Gazette notifications that haven't been issued, I don't know. But as far as Parliament is concerned, it passed.
Do you still think that your party deserves to survive, given all the human rights abuses and corruption that we've talked about.
It's like saying, do you think somebody deserves to survive because he's got a wart on his face or a pimple on his nose?
It's a bit more than that.
No, it's not a bit more. There's a far more important things the party stands for. It stands for the pluralist identity of India. It stands for the values of the freedom struggle. It stands for social justice in a country where 70% of the people still live under $2 a day. It stands for the distribution of the profits of government while standing also for the growth that has enabled India to become one of right now the third largest economy in the world, all of which have also been important things to be proud of. The Congress Party inherited from the British and India with 90% of the population living under the poverty line. Today it's 26. It inherited an India with 17% literacy. Today it's 72. It inherited an India with life expectancy of 27. Today that's 70.
Shashi Tharoor.
Some progress has been made, and the Congress Party ruled India for much of the time this progress was being made. Let's not write all that off.
Very good to have you on Conflict Zone. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Tim.